Why are the religious so incapable of dealing with the real world? Not the fantasy land in their own heads, but the world that lies beyond their brain. That's the question we've been asking around here for a very long time, and I think today we've got a perfect vehicle to open a prolonged discussion. So, let's get to it, shall we? Mike Winger recently put out a very short video that we're going to take a look at today, saying that atheists are blinded to the evidence for Christianity. No, that's backwards. Mike Winger is blind to reality itself. He doesn't even care, though. This is all just a scam to make people go along with his emotionally comforting beliefs and hopefully cough up some cash along the way. But I think it's important to take a deep dive into it and see what's what. So today, that's what we're going to do. So before I get started, this is going to be kind of an oddball video for a couple of reasons. See, this is a very short video that I'm going to be responding to, a mere 41 seconds in fact, but there is so much wrong here that I'm going to talk about that it seemed prudent to do it here in the regular channel. Normally, anything like this would end up as a Patreon special where I'll post short-form content that any Patreon supporter can see and enjoy. That kind of thing happens kind of whenever I come up with something. If I find something interesting to do, I'll do it. So irregularly, but I try to do a couple a month at least just to help my patrons out. I'm going to use this as a springboard into a lot of things, especially, I think, explaining to the religious why their supposed evidence isn't actually evidence at all. And I think that's something that really needs to be laid out because a lot of theists love to claim that they have evidence for their gods. No, you don't. And I'll explain why. I just figured I needed to explain some of this up front so people would go into it understanding. So now that that's out of the way, let's get into it.
There's this divide that it maybe is best explained by the analogy of eyes being open or closed. When you close your eyes, there's nothing in the room.
Yes, there is, Mike. You are an idiot. You don't see anything, but that doesn't make everything that's there simply vanish into the ether. Poof, it's all gone. Yeah, no it's not. It's still there. And you can prove this to yourself by, with your eyes closed, trying to walk around the room. You're going to bump into stuff that you can't see, but guess what? It's still there. This is like saying that everything disappears when you turn off the lights. Yeah, that's just stupid. Sorry, but it just is. Yet, this is the kind of mindset that we see from the religious. They're hardly alone, of course, but we'll limit this to the religious for the moment because they're the biggest idiots when it comes to things like this. They don't have a firm grasp on reality, sadly. They're not actually concerned. Now, I know this is just Mike Winger not actually thinking about what he's saying, and that's not really a surprise, but it does reveal some of the actual mistakes that the religious tend to make, the places that their views on reality completely fail them, and they just make themselves look like complete idiots. Mostly because they are. Now, that's not meant to be an insult against the religious, it's just something that they're doing wrong, and no matter how many times we point it out, they don't seem to care enough to actually change their views. So, no, Mike, the world doesn't cease to exist when you close your eyes. You're just a dumbass.
And as long as you keep your eyes closed, I could say to you, prove to me that there's a painting in the room. I'm going to keep my eyes closed.
Well, that's easy because you have other senses that you can use besides your eyes. You can walk over there and touch it. Now, maybe you might not be able to identify what it's a painting of, but you didn't say that, did you? You asked if there was a painting. Well, yes there is. It's a physical object that takes up space in the room and you can detect it through a variety of means beyond your eyes. Of course, There's always the method that I've advocated for absurd arguments like this in the past, and it works for solipsists too, just saying. But if you want to deny that the painting or the furniture or say, I don't know, a baseball bat actually exists because you can't see it, I would be more than happy to prove it to you. I'll just come over there, whack you over the head with it until either you change your mind and accept that objective reality is what it is, or you pass out due to blunt force trauma. Either way is fine with me. Mike, don't be an idiot.
It's going to be harder to prove that. Or I open my eyes, in which case I'm not even asking. And this is what often happens, I think, with skeptics. There's so much taken for granted as they begin their study for God.
No, you've got that completely backwards, Mike. It isn't skeptics that are taking things for granted. It's you people. It's the religious. Because we're not studying for God. We're not taking that as a given like you are. We're looking at the evidence to see what it actually points to, if it actually suggests that any God of any kind is actually real in the objective reality that we all share. We're not starting with the unsupported conclusion reached for entirely emotional reasons that a God's gotta be there. That's you. We're asking you to demonstrate how that conclusion is actually defensible, and you people are absolutely terrible at it. So we're going to let him show that his side is wrong, because his side is very wrong. And then we're going to talk about what it would actually take to have a credible case, which the religious absolutely do not have. Now, they might wish they did because they're operating on pure confirmation bias, but in reality, they just don't. This will hopefully educate them on why they're not really impressing anybody but themselves. Not that they actually care about that or anything.
They begin looking for God, right? They look around at the universe. They look around at creation. They look around at their own life. They feel their own soul, their own being. They see beauty, morality, and goodness, and that's all just there without explanation for them.
Except we're not looking for God. That's you people. I'm not looking for God. I'm not looking for Allah. I'm not looking for invisible, intangible, universe-creating pixies or the flying spaghetti monster. I'm looking for truth, because truth is all that matters, and anything that is true, anything that is real, it has to be supported by objectively verifiable evidence that can be seen, in air quotes, studied and evaluated without having to believe in anything specific beforehand. This is where the religious get everything wrong. They are starting out with a conclusion that they've reached for entirely emotional reasons, not a conclusion based on reality and rationality, not anything based on evidence. They believe it because they want it to be true, not because it actually is. They have an emotional desire for these things to be so, whether they actually are or not. And skeptics don't have that, which is a good thing. We're not looking for God. We're looking for truth. We have no reason to think that any gods of any kind actually exist in the real world. We recognize that our feelings really don't matter in the search for objective reality. And Mike, neither do yours. They don't matter for us, and they don't matter for you, and that's the way it goes. You're doing intelligence completely wrong. Knock it off.
And then they turn to you and say, okay, now prove there's a God. And you're like, you're sort of starting from a place where you have missed all the evidence.
No, that's absolutely not the case. Now, that was the end of Mike's video. Like I said, it's pretty short. So here's everything that was wrong with it. You haven't presented any evidence at all. That's a big one. They think they have, but they really haven't. So here's how evidence works in the real world, because the religious clearly don't understand. Evidence, by definition, is the available body of facts or information indicating whether a belief or proposition is true or valid. You can't just start with the assumption that the position is true without ever looking at the evidence first, and that's exactly what the religious are doing. They believe on faith that there is a God. and that proposition has never been adequately supported or defended in any objectively verifiable way. It doesn't matter what you want to be true. It matters only what is actually true, and for the religious, they've never established that at all. I might really want there to be $1 trillion in my bank account. Sadly, it's not actually there. All the wishes and dreams in the world aren't going to make it magically appear, because that's childish, and that's exactly what religion is. This goes right back to the pathetic religious confusion between if and because. The religious love to say, well, if there's a God, blah, blah, blah. But that's not it, as in, this is a proposition that needs to be determined. They don't care about that at all. They are already convinced for emotional and faith-based reasons that their gods exist. They might be saying if, but in their heads, it's being automatically translated to because there's a God. But that doesn't help, though. Faith doesn't actually mean anything, no matter how strongly it's held. This is where interfaith discussions become so utterly pointless, because both sides are always working from their own emotionally comforting, faith-based assumptions that can't be rationally demonstrated. The Muslim is thinking, because Allah is real, and the Christian's thinking, because God is real, and the Hindus out there going, because Krishna is real, and none of them are willing to even consider the ideas of the others, nor to question their own base assumptions. That is not how rationality works, sorry, it's just not. See, a religious worldview, no matter what religion you're using, it operates as a filter for reality. It's why I don't have a worldview as the religious describe it. I don't need anything which sits between my view of the real world and the real world. I only need the real world and the things that we can learn from it. My desire to understand as many true things and as few false things as I can, that's not emotional, that's intellectual. I don't care what is true, so long as it's actually true. And the religious, they don't seem to care about that at all. They believe just because it makes them happy. Yet happiness isn't a defensible indicator of reality. It doesn't address what is actually so, only what people wish were so, and your wishes and dreams don't matter. Your fee-fees aren't important. Either there is a God or there isn't. Pick one. Just don't do it because of your feelings. Actually have something to support yourself from the realm of objective reality. This is what the religious don't have, and I'm not sure why they're so confused by the notion. See, where they're going wrong, it ought to be really obvious. They are starting with the assumption that their God is real, and then everything gets filtered through their beliefs to suggest that absolutely everything out in the real world, that somehow proves that their emotionally comforting beliefs must be true. Because God is real, not if God is real. That's why things like, look at the trees, are just so stupid. Yes, there are trees. There they are. Now you're asserting a lot of other things that simply are not in evidence. Look at the trees only proves that there are trees. It proves absolutely nothing else about them. And this might be simple to see because most religions are doing the same damn thing to support the same ludicrous ideas. Look at the trees isn't exclusive to Christianity. Muslims do it too. So do other religions. They just come to different conclusions because they have their very own religious blinders on. The Christians would freak out if they heard the Muslims say, look at the trees, that proves Allah. No, it doesn't. It doesn't prove anything. It's only confirmation bias. It's getting to the conclusion that you desperately want to reach because you have an emotional attachment to the idea. But whether you like it or not, that doesn't make the idea true. If you remember, a long time ago, I did a big 4-part series looking at Christian apologetic claims, and we all learned that it was all just an excuse to get to, therefore God. Except none of it works because they never established that God existed in the first place. You can't just blindly declare that there's an undemonstrated link between some observation that you had or some thought that you came up with in your head and this thing that you believe in for emotional reasons. That's just as stupid as saying, "Look at the trees, therefore Elvis." It's absurd, it really is. Yet people like Mike here keep asking us to look at the evidence. What evidence? Where is it, and what does it actually prove? Because you can't just say that it proves something that it demonstrably does not, just because it strokes your fifis. That is not going to impress anybody, and that's why they really don't want to talk to us, do they? We're not going to take this ridiculous nonsense seriously, nor should we. Nor should they, but they do. If you want to provide evidence for God, you have to provide something that directly and demonstrably points to a real, existent, demonstrable deity, and the religious can't do that. So they just pretend that there's evidence because they've already got that conclusion stuck in their heads, and they can't conceivably question whether or not that conclusion is valid because it would make them feel bad. Mostly because they just don't care. It fulfills an emotional need, and that's all that matters to them. Except out here in the real world, it doesn't. You have to be able to do better than that. And the religious, they never ever can. So anyway, that's most of what I have to say on that. What did you think? I know we've looked at Mike Winger before and we weren't impressed in the past, but what about this time? As far as I'm concerned, this is just embarrassing. It really is. I mean, it always is, but this was particularly painful. The religious keep saying, "Look at the trees," and stupid crap like that, and they don't care how ridiculous it is, because they're just making themselves look like idiots, which is pretty obvious because they are. They're not talking to us. They're talking to each other because they're all coming to the same conclusion, and that's just confirmation bias. If they want to convince us, they need to come up with direct, objectively demonstrable, evidence-based corroboration that the God that they believe in actually exists in some verifiable way in the real world, because absolutely nothing less will do, and they can't come anywhere remotely close. Otherwise, they're just embarrassing themselves because without that, there is no good reason to believe that any of this garbage is true. But again, they don't really care about that, do they? This is all about feelings and never about reality. Reality doesn't matter to the religious. It has nothing at all to do with the truth. It's all about their fifis, and that's absolutely childish. It really is. Not that they care, because, of course, they don't. But it's important to keep pointing it out, because sooner or later, some of this might actually get through their thick noggins. They have to understand why they fail, and how badly they fail. Granted, it's not going to change anything for the vast majority of them. You're still going to have the Mike Wingers of the world out there trying to scam the religiously gullible out of their hard-earned money, but maybe it might make a few wake up from their self-imposed religious faith-based slumber and actually learn something. Because learning something is what this is all about. And they don't want to learn things, do they? Not most of the time, but I hold out hope for a few of them. Because wouldn't that be nice?
Bum